The copyright holders are the NGA and CCSSO. They cannot be, nothing can be taken away from them, and you can only add 15%. And there's all these stipulations that are outlined in a copyright notice attached with the standards. And here's some portions of the copyright notice. Any person who exercises any rights to the Common Core standards agrees to the terms of this license, which is about 3 pages long. The NGA and CCSSO shall be acknowledged as the sole owners and developers of the Common Core, and no claims to the contrary shall be made. So they're claiming their little fame. Then my favorite part is this part. The Common Core standards are provided as is and with all faults, and the NGA Center and CCSSO make no representations or warranties of any kind. So here they are promoting their little brainchild here that's the silver bullet for education, but in the fine print down at the bottom they say that they really have no liability for what they've created. Now I want to introduce you to our friend Dr. Tom Kimbrell at the Arkansas Department of Education. He's the commissioner appointed by Governor Beebe, and he testified for, I don't know, probably 8 hours at our hearing about Common Core. And this is what he had to say when asked why the standards were copyrighted.
The copyright issue, and I asked a specific question. Why did they copyright them? To keep textbook publishers from being able to take them and put them in their work.
I have here my literature textbook that I got about 3 weeks after this hearing, and I'd like to show you the first 38 pages of the textbook, which has the entire 11th and 12th grade English Language Arts Common Core standards printed word for word, along with a bunch of other stuff that nobody is ever going to read, and I have to lug it around every day for the rest of the year. And they even put a little copyright notice in the front saying that the NGA and CCSSO are the ones that own it, because no claims shall be made to the contrary. And we contacted Hope Mifflin Harcourt, the publisher of this textbook, and they declined to comment on the issue.
How much does it weigh, Patrick?
I don't know.
Too much.
It's huge. I think we only use like this much of it the whole year. But anyway, and also we tried contacting the NGA, and that's like trying to get a hold of the president. Nobody ever calls you back. So next question, were the standards based on any research? End of that question. There was no research done. If you look at standards in any field, whether it's medicine, psychology, engineering, every field has its own standards, just like teaching does. And if you look at standards in any other field, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of footnotes saying what that standard was based off of. Was it based off of research, someone's opinion? Where did that standard come from? If you look through the Common Core, there are no footnotes that tell you anything about who made up what or what it's based off of. So that was your answer to that question. Are the standards, this is a really important one, especially in elementary, are the standards developmentally appropriate for young children? And this is Dr. Megan Koshnick, who testified at the University of Notre Dame. And she is a psychologist that specializes in child development and anxiety. And this is portions of what she had to say about it.
In general, I see this with Common Core, and other people, as they discuss math and English standards later, can sort this out for me. But what I kind of saw was that they saw this college and career readiness goal, and then they backed those standards down all the way to kindergarten. So instead of thinking about what's developmentally appropriate for a kindergartner, they're thinking, this is where we want that kindergartner to wind up. Let's track this all back down to kindergarten and have them work on those skills in a kindergarten way. There's some major flaws with that. We can train students to answer questions. You can train a second grader to answer abstract questions, but you have not really changed the internal process of understanding abstraction. You have trained them to answer questions. But you see this all throughout the standards. They'll talk about fewer, deeper, not a mile wide and an inch deep. They're always deeper standards, fewer and deeper. And really, when I look at them, often they're requiring these children, 8, 7, 9, who are right in the midst of this concrete operational period. Remember, they like concrete operations, no abstractions. And they're requiring them to explain, justify, and apply principles that are abstract in nature. And this is repeated throughout the math standards. It's no longer good enough to know that 7 minus 3 equals 4. You have to explain and justify how you came up with that answer. And probably, if they're going to make you do it the other way around, which you often see them do, you've got to say something about the inverse property of mathematics. And these are really abstract principles for a young child to be learning. Phase 2. So this is what's at stake with standards that are not developed with careful consideration for what's developmentally appropriate. First of all, as from the child psychologist's perspective, you're going to stress out the kid. I'm going to be real busy because I specialize in anxiety, because I'm going to have a lot of really anxious kids. But it's going to affect the classroom as a whole, because the curriculum is going to include lessons and strategies that aren't appropriate, and the teacher's going to have to go over and over and over them to nail those down. And it's really going to leave less time for grade appropriate materials and really no time for repeating those or repetition.
So there you can see extremely expert opinion from a field that was not even consulted when these standards were developed. The next question is, what does college and career ready mean? You hear that over and over there, college and career ready standards, but that's really kind of more of a marketing term than having any meaning, because where did they come up with that? How did they find out that they were college and career ready? So this next person in the video is Jason Zimba, who was the lead architect of the math standards, and he's a professor, and this is what he had to say at a hearing when he was asked, what does college and career ready really mean?
Agreement that I believe we have on this. The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM. It's not for international.
That's true. It's not only not for STEM. It's also not for selective colleges that, for example, UC Berkeley. Even whether you're going to be an engineer or not, you better have pre-calculus to get into UC Berkeley, right? We have to think about engineering colleges and that's scientific. That's true. I think the third pathway goes a lot towards that. But your issue is really broader than that.
Oh yes.
So I just wanted to make sure that we got that out.
I'm not just thinking of selective colleges. There's a much broader question here.
That's right. It's both, I think, in the sense of being clear about what this college readiness does and doesn't get you, and that's the big subject.
But not to call something college ready when it only applies to a certain kind of college and a certain lower level of mathematical expertise that won't buy you far on the international market in most major disciplines of technology, economics, business, and so on.
Okay, thank you. That's right.
So he didn't have anything to come back at her. That's about how they do when you put them under pressure with the real questions. They don't have answers because there aren't any. How much, what cost? This is a highly complicated, and you could talk about this for hours, but this is a basic cost analysis that was done over the next 7 years, and it'll cost the United States almost $16 billion. And you can see that a majority of that, more than half, is spent on professional development and technology, all within the first 2 to 3 years before the standards actually start. So obviously for players in the technology field like Bill Gates, this was a big deal to dump an extra $6 billion into his industry. Also for textbooks is a total of over $2 billion over the course of 7 years. But you can see from this chart that textbooks and professional development material combined was $7 billion, which would be the market that Pearson and companies like that are in. So for companies in those two markets, it was a big financial gain for them to make sure that this goes through. Next question is, what is PARCC? And Grace introduced you to it. This is their website, and you can see they are managed by Achieve Incorporated because they have no legal presence. You can't sue PARCC because PARCC isn't anybody. They're just a name. And actually, this screenshot is old. It used to say PARCC is a 22-state consortium. Now it just says PARCC is a 19-state consortium. They're dropping like flies. They're finally waking up and acting out. In fact, Florida announced just last week that they were the state serving as the money handler for the operation, and they announced that they're backing out by the end of next month. So now there really is no one to handle the money for PARCC. So they're a fire that's just getting bigger and bigger. So then if you look at Achieve's website, Achieve is sort of this kind of odd political advocacy kind of organization, and I'm not really sure what business they have managing a testing consortium and what they know about that, but they have an agenda, and their whole website tells you about all the things they advocate for in education reform. This is their page about Arkansas that has their whole policy. They want all the standards aligned with the expectation of college and careers. One of their things on their agenda is to develop a longitudinal data system. So the people managing the test want the standards and they want the data system, and it is a big circle. It just goes on and on. This is the little self-proclaimed summary of Achieve from their website. It says that the 1996 National Education Summit, a bipartisan group of governors and corporate leaders, decided to create and lead an organization dedicated to supporting standard-based education reform efforts across the states. To do so, they formed Achieve as an independent, bipartisan, nonprofit education reform organization. To this day, Achieve remains the only education reform organization led by a board of directors of governors and business leaders. This unique perspective has enabled Achieve to set a bold and visionary agenda over the past 15 years, leading Education Week in 2006 to rank Achieve as one of the most influential education policy organizations in the nation. And they're managing the test I'll be taking next year. That's wonderful. Next question. Students in Kentucky and New York took a test that their state developed for themselves last year. New York and Kentucky were kind of the test dummies, if you could say, even though we all are. And so they fully implemented Common Core last year in all grades, and they made up their own test to simulate the PARCC test. So we're making pre-test for pre-test for the real test that doesn't exist yet. And here's how one of the top schools in New York did. The green bars would be their scores in 2010 pre-Common Core, and that was their scores from this past year across their school in 3rd through 8th grade. This is the superintendent of that school district, Dr. Joseph Rella. In 2012, he was the superintendent of the year in New York, so he obviously knows what he's doing. And this was a call that was sent out to all the parents when the scores came in.
Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Rella. This past week, the State Education Department released the scores, the test scores, for tests that our 3rd through 8th graders took last April. And as they had predicted, State Ed, about 30% of the students across New York State passed these tests. Another way to say this is 70% of the students failed this test. Our students will be getting these grade reports in September. When that happened, I felt you needed to get some word from me about what my position is on this. I posted a couple of letters. One that I wrote to our state representatives in the state legislature, our 2 senators and a senatorman, and one to you, the parents. I posted those on the website. You'll be getting that parent letter when the grade reports are mailed home to you middle of September or so. Not thinking that this would go any further, I went home. Well, it went further. Apparently it got onto the internet. Not apparently, it got onto the internet. It's gone viral. And I'm getting letters, emails rather, and phone calls from not only around Long Island, but New York State and all around the country, because 44 states are involved or about to get involved with the Common Core standards. My position on this is pretty simple. The implementation and the testing associated with the Common Core is hurting our children. Okay? I think that's clear enough. I don't know, I didn't, and I don't know how I could possibly tell our kids 70% of you are failures, and because these tests are tied in the state's mind to college completion, 70% of you probably aren't college material. That hurts kids. That message is wrong. Well, bottom line is this thing has grown and grown. There's going to be a rally on Saturday at the high school.
That's the end of his call. Here's a portion of his letter, and he says, "What changed this year was not our students' intelligence or the talent and skill of our teachers and administrators. What changed was the curriculum and the test. What changed was the inadequate curricular materials from the state education department. What changed was giving the test before the students were properly prepared." How will student data be collected? This is another funny topic when you start asking the people who are supposed to know the answers to these questions, because they swear up and down that they aren't collecting this data, they never will, they never have. They tell you no. And bottom line is they're sort of being bypassed too in this whole data collection attempt, because it's tied to the PARCC test, which they have no control over. The U.S. Department of Education is prohibited by law from creating a national data system, but the Education Science Reform Act of 2002 gave the federal government the authority to publish guidelines for states developing their own data systems. Over the past decade, a slew of new federal incentives and federally funded data models have spurred states to monitor students' early years, performance in college, and success in the workforce by following individuals systematically and efficiently across state lines. This is a little chart that shows you how their system works. They have, here's the humble little student here full of data, and here's your local school district, and they begin gathering information from for-profit vendors, such as the textbook publishers. There's a whole slew of companies that make practice tests that collect information on students. Then from there, it's shared through the district to your State Department of Education. And from there, information pours in from other government entities as well as other government programs designed to collect data. And it's all patterned after things that were created. The groundwork was laid by the Data Quality Campaign, which is this organization set up by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to kind of oversee it and make recommendations to states and monitor state progress. And the National Education Data Model, the Eden Data File, EdFacts, it's all this giant system, convoluted system for collecting data. So they're skirting around the law of not being able to create a federal database by having all the states make their own databases that are all the same, so when you put them all together, you have a federal database. This is a screenshot from one of their websites, which is currently offline due to the shutdown. They conveniently just took it off the internet, but it says the Education Data Exchange Network and EdFacts are a federally mandated data collection and storage system through which states submit their educational data to the United States Department of Education. And then it goes on to tell you the 100 and some odd different data groups of subgroups, and there's hundreds of data points of different things they collect. So this is selections from the cooperative agreement, which is a 20-some-odd page document that was the agreement between the U.S. Department of Education and PARCC to create the PARCC test. And you'll see who signed it in a minute, to agree to the terms. But basically, this was the contract for the $160 million that they were going to be paid. So the grantee must provide timely and complete access to any and all data collected at the state level to the U.S. Department of Ed or its designated program monitors, technical assistance providers, or research partners, as well as auditors. And then it must also produce all student-level data in a manner consistent with an industry-recognized open license interoperability standard that is approved by the U.S. Department of Education during the grant period. So by signing this document, PARCC agreed to make all information they collect available to the U.S. Department of Education. So since every student in those 19 states will be taking that test, the data from every student in those 19 states will be turned over on demand to the U.S. Department of Education and just about anybody else that wants to see it. And the contract between Smarter Balance, the other testing consortium, is the exact same thing copied and pasted, so it's the same for the other one too. So there's 40 some odd states signed up between the two consortiums, so that's like 90% of the students in America through two pieces of paper that were signed. This is the last page where it was signed. Two people from the U.S. Department of Education and two people from the Florida Department of Education signed this contract on behalf of everyone in the 22 states at the time. So none of those four people were elected, and that's not really what local control looks like either. They agreed to stuff on our behalf when we didn't elect them, any of them. So the next important question after that is, how will data be used? This next video that I show you is a research engineer at a for-profit company that is owned by Pearson that developed software that lets this company take data that they access from your PARCC test and from other data from hundreds of different sources and compile it, and it can tell you what career path you would be best at. So, like Grace was saying, it could very quickly turn into, here's what career path the computer says you should do. So you'll see it's almost creepy the way he talks about it.
We're doing. I want to talk too, we're pulling data from everywhere. You name it, having open standards is important. We get data from thousands, tens of thousands of different places. Being able to do that fast and do it clean is incredibly important for us. Just want to talk about one thing here that's important data that we need to be able to pull in to make all this work. This is Common Core data about skills. I know I'm really running out of time. I'm not going to go into it in detail. Now, when we surveyed students, not a single one of them actually cared about, never asked us about the Common Core. But, we looked at it and said, all right, I'm not so worried about that. Because how many people say, if you ask them, do you care whether or not you have TCP/IP on your smartphone? They probably say, no, I don't. But you do care. This is the glue that actually ties everything together. If I want to achieve a goal, how do I know when I got there? How do I know? If I've got my own individual path to achieve my goals, how do I know when I got there? Now I can look at this and see these are the skills I need to achieve my goal, and I can turn that into a pathway to get there. So with that, that's what we're doing with open data, and we're very excited about it. Thank you.
So there you go. They can take, let me go back to that one slide he had it on. With their software, each one of these little blocks is one standard in the Common Core, and they can take your test questions that you answered, and they know whether you got it right or wrong, and they can match it to the standards, and this would be an example chart of a student. The red ones would be ones they're bad at, the green ones are ones they're good at, yellow would be neutral, and then from that, they can build a pathway out of the skills that you're good at and match you to a career that matches that pathway of skills. which is a little crazy. So he said it himself, Common Core standards are the glue that holds everything together, because if everybody isn't tested on the same thing, then they can't access that data and their whole little business doesn't work. So this is an example chart of the different entities and programs involved with Common Core, and there is no complete list because it would be the size of this building, but this is just a summary. And you can see data collection is green, and that's a huge portion of the whole initiative. And the standards are just this little bit, and then there's the professional development part, and then you got the Department of Education all up in everyone's business, all over the place. So you heard Bill Gates is involved. He stands to make a lot of money off of it, but he has his foundation where he put most of his money, and Bill Gates has an interesting idea about philanthropy. He is a pioneer in a field called venture philanthropy, where he uses his wealth to give back to others while at the same time creating a return on his investment. So he's applying business to philanthropy, and you'll see that over and over in how he does Common Core. He's investing in Common Core because he stands to make a profit, even though it looks like he's just giving out money to people. This is how much money he gave to the National Governors Association, and it cut off. But there's one grant is 19 million, so I think it goes up to 40-something million. Here's the CCSSO. He gave them 79 million, and this is just since I think 2007. So in the past 6 years, almost 7 now. Then 36 million to Achieve, the independent, nonpartisan reform group that's managing our tests. Then the Foundation for Excellence in Education, he gave them $1.6 million. Then this one is my favorite, the National PTA. He gave them $2.5 million just in the past few years. And here's one of the grants for $500,000. And its purpose written on the grant is to educate parents and communities on the new standards and to empower leaders to create the changes they need in their school system for Common Core implementation. And if you go on the National PTA's website, since that grant was written, about half of it is about Common Core. It was they're basically being paid to advertise for it. Pearson is involved too. Pearson is the largest textbook publishing conglomerate in the world. They're based in London, and there's 3 major conglomerates in textbook publishing. There's McGraw-Hill, Pearson, and Hope Mifflin Harcourt. And over the past 6 to 8 years, they've bought up every single textbook publisher and just about any company that does anything in education to strengthen their fleet of companies. And how they operate is they'll take one textbook, and like this is a Holt McDougall textbook, but it's published by Hope Mifflin Harcourt. And that is because Hope Mifflin Harcourt makes a textbook, and then they own 15 different textbook publisher companies. So they publish the same textbook under 15 different brand names as 15 different textbooks, even though it's essentially the same text, just it's designed differently. And Pearson and McGraw-Hill all do the same thing. McGraw-Hill, Pearson made an attempt to purchase McGraw-Hill last year, but the paperwork was turned down by the Federal Trade Commission because it would have created an even larger monopoly than already exists. This is a report written by a business analyst in British Columbia, Canada, after Pearson was leading a push to do essentially the same thing, create common standards and a common curriculum and a common set of tests in the province of British Columbia. And so this was a report written by him to the British Columbia Teachers Federation. And in this report, he says, according to the investment research firm Sanford Bernstein and Company, Pearson is pursuing a variety of growth strategies, including one that will revolutionize how education is delivered to students around the world, starting with the United States. It is an ambitious attempt to further commercialize education by claiming its products and services will raise student and teacher performance, while at the same time cutting spending. If successful, Bernstein argues, it would make every teacher and school student in the United States a potential customer by personalizing education in U.S. schools through technology and best practices. And since British Columbia is part of the North American Education Division, it too will become a target for the new strategy. This is also part of the report. This is a list of all the companies related to education that Pearson has purchased since 2007. And some of these companies, they were purchased by Pearson for more than they were worth at face value, some up to 2 times what they were worth. And some of these companies, let's see, SchoolNet was one they purchased that was a U.S. school data collector to individualize learning. Chancery Software, provider of student information services, PARCC assessment, provider of testing services. So leading up to this Common Core rollout, they were strengthening their fleet with plenty of companies that specialize in the things that weren't so important back then, but all of a sudden are the thing now in education. So it's very clear that they had an active role in this and could see what was coming, because they were buying companies that at the time weren't really making a profit because their services weren't needed, but now all of a sudden they're needed everywhere. This is Educational Testing Service. They're a company based in New Jersey. They're a non-profit company that owns multiple for-profit companies. They own and manage the College Board. They own Prometrics, which is a testing company. And they have contracts with both SBAC and PARCC to create portions of the test. And even though they're nonprofit, if you look at their most recent tax return that's available, in 2011 they reported over $1 billion in revenue and $1 billion in expenses. And basically how they operate is they go out and get contracts as a nonprofit because they don't have to pay taxes, and they're more appealing to people like PARCC. And they'll get a contract for $100 million, and then they'll take it to one of their for-profit companies like Prometrics and designate them the contract holder and run the money through their company. So it's kind of a fishy operation they're running. And now they're all involved with our testing as well. So this is a little map of the major parts of the Common Core initiative. You've got the standards over here, and they were written by NGA and the CCSSO and Achieve. And you've got the assessments, and these are the companies that have contracts to create them: Pearson, ETS, WestEd, Measured Progress. Then you have the college entrance exams, which are also affiliated with ETS. Then you've got the curriculum, you've got the textbook publishers, and the professional development. Then you've got the student information systems down at the end for the data collection. So you have Pearson and Pearson and Pearson and Pearson, and you have ETS and ETS and ETS, and you've got Microsoft down in the student information systems. So if you look where the people put their money, the federal government put their money in just about everything except curriculum, because they're prohibited by law from creating a curriculum, so they intentionally kept their money out of curriculum. And then the Gates Foundation gave money all over the board to just about anyone. So the bottom line is the standards are copyrighted by private organizations who don't represent who should have been represented to create those standards. They were not based on any peer-reviewed research. They only are designed to prepare students for a 2-year non-selective university. Tests are very subjective and more dependent on actually knowing how to play the game than actually knowing the content. Data will be collected and shared without parental consent. Contracts were signed by people who have no accountability to us as citizens. Major supporters of Common Core either have financial interest or are literally being paid to support it. And the Common Core standards are the glue that holds the entire thing together. That's it.